In the wind-swept expanse of Wyoming Territory, 1885, Sarah Mitchell stands alone at Clearwater Station, her calloused hands gripping worn leather reins. 5 ranchers have already turned her away. A woman alone has no business running cattle, they say. Her last coin spent on the train ticket west, she watches her dreams of ranching independence crumble like prairie dust. But fate has other plans. When wealthy rancher James Blackwood witnesses her rejection, something stirs in his weathered heart. In an unprecedented gesture, he offers her not just a job, but his entire Blue Mesa ranch, along with a silver ring that promises a future neither of them expected. What drives a successful rancher to entrust his legacy to a stranger? And can 2 souls, scarred by life's hardships, find healing in the vast embrace of the Western frontier? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's thumb traced the worn brass edge of her father's pocket watch, its weight familiar in her palm. Through the scratched crystal face, the hands pointed to high noon, though the watch hadn't ticked in years. The last time it had run was the morning her father died, leaving their modest Colorado ranch buried in debt. The station master's laughter still rang in her ears. "A woman, running cattle. Go back east, miss. This ain't no place for your kind." She'd heard those words at every ranch from Cheyenne to Clearwater, but Sarah Mitchell wasn't raised to surrender. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The land doesn't care if you're a man or woman. It only responds to respect and hard work." James Blackwood's quiet authority commanded attention as he stepped down from his stallion. Unlike the others, he hadn't dismissed her with mockery. His eyes, the color of summer sage, had studied her with careful consideration. "Miss Mitchell," he'd said, his voice carrying the weight of years on the frontier, "walk with me." The path from the station led them past the general store, where curious faces pressed against dusty windows. James moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who owned not just property, but his place in the world. His silver-streaked hair and weathered face spoke of experience, while his straight-backed posture suggested military service. "Tell me about your experience," he said, not looking at her but ahead, as if reading her answer in the distant mountains. Sarah squared her shoulders. "I ran my father's ranch for 5 years after he fell ill. 200 head of cattle, quarter horses. For breeding, I can break horses, mend fences, and doctor sick calves. I've led cattle drives and negotiated contracts." James nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "And why here? Why Wyoming?" "Because here, a person can still build something from nothing." She paused, weighing her next words. "My father always said Wyoming was where the real ranching was, where the land could either make you or break you. I aim to let it make me." A ghost of a smile touched James's lips. They'd reached the edge of town, where the road disappeared into the vast prairie. He turned to face her fully, and Sarah noticed the fine lines around his eyes, marks of both laughter and hardship. "Blue Mesa Ranch is 5,000 acres, he said. "Good water rights, strong bloodlines in the herd. It's taken me 30 years to build it." He reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "And I'm prepared to sign it over to you." Sarah's breath caught. "Mr. Blackwood, I don't understand." "James," he corrected gently, "and you don't need to understand yet. What you need to know is that I've spent my life building something that matters. Now I need someone who'll carry it forward, someone with the grit to face down every man who ever said they couldn't." He held out the envelope. "The deed's in here, along with something else. A question, really, but that can wait. Until you've proven to yourself what I already see." Sarah's fingers trembled as she took the envelope, its weight seeming to contain all her dreams and an equal measure of terror. "Why me?" James turned back toward the mountains, his profile sharp against the afternoon sky. "Because in all my years, I've learned that the measure of a rancher isn't in their grip on a rope, but in their heart's grip on the land. I saw that in you the moment you stood your ground at that station." He smiled fully then, years falling away from his face. "The rest is just details. The watch in Sarah's pocket seemed to pulse with renewed purpose, as if her father's spirit was urging her forward. She drew herself up, meeting James's gaze with quiet determination. "When do we begin?" "We already have." James gestured toward a dust cloud approaching from the west. "That's my foreman, Thomas, with a wagon. He'll take us to Blue Mesa. You're home now, if you choose to make it so." As they waited, Sarah felt the Wyoming wind sweep through her soul, carrying away the sting of rejection and replacing it with something new, something that felt remarkably like destiny. The wagon crested the final hill, and Sarah's breath caught at the sight of Blue Mesa Ranch sprawling before her. The main house stood proud against the backdrop of purple mountains, its weathered logs and wide porch speaking of permanence in a land where little lasted. To the east, cattle dotted the grasslands like scattered copper pennies, while to the west a creek carved its ancient path through stands of aspen. Thomas, the foreman, handled the reins with practiced ease, his silence more contemplative than hostile. He was older than James by a decade, his face carved deep by sun and wind. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of careful consideration. "Built most of this with my own hands, alongside Mr. Blackwood," he said, gesturing toward the barn complex. 30 years of sunrise to sunset. You understand what that means, miss?" Sarah met his weathered gaze. "It means this land is more than just property to you. It's your life's work." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, not quite approval, but perhaps the beginning of respect. James, riding alongside them on his stallion, nodded almost imperceptibly. The deed in Sarah's satchel seemed to grow heavier with each passing moment. As they approached the main house, ranch hands paused in their work, their expressions a mix of curiosity and skepticism. A young man leading a horse stopped dead in his tracks, mouth agape. "That's Daniel," Thomas offered. "Good with horses, green with everything else. The older fellow by the corral is Marcus, best roper this side of the Rockies. Jenny handles the cooking and house affairs." James guided his horse closer. "They're all staying on, if you'll have them. Good people, everyone." The wagon rolled to a stop and Sarah descended, her boots meeting Wyoming soil for the first time as the owner of all she surveyed. The responsibility settled around her shoulders like a heavy shawl. Inside the main house, James led them to his study. Afternoon light filtered through clean windows, illuminating walls lined with leather-bound ledgers. A massive oak desk dominated the room, its surface neat but for a single document. "The formal deed," James explained, moving behind the desk. "Need to sign it proper with witnesses." He paused, his hand hovering over the paper. "There's something else you should know, Sarah." She stood straighter, preparing herself. "This ranch. It's not just land and cattle. It's a legacy of promises. To the hands who've given their lives to it. To the merchants in town who depend on our business, to the families who've homesteaded nearby, counting on our water rights being managed fair." His eyes met hers. "You won't just be running a ranch. You'll be holding up a corner of the world for a lot of good people." Sarah moved to the window, looking out over the property. A young ranch hand was showing Daniel how to properly coil a rope, the lesson delivered with patience and quiet authority. Near the kitchen, Jenny was hanging laundry, pausing to wave at a passing rider. "My father used to say that a ranch is like a spider's web," Sarah said softly. "Touch one strand and the whole thing moves. You have to tend to every connection, every relationship." She turned back to James. "I understand what you're offering and what it means." Thomas, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. "Means more than that, miss. Mr. Blackwood here. He's not just signing over land. He's trusting you with his dream." James pulled out the chair behind the desk, gesturing for Sarah to sit. "Your dream now, if you want it." He placed a pen beside the deed, along with everything that comes with it. Sarah's fingers found her father's watch again as she sat down. Through the window, she could see the mountains turning gold in the late afternoon light. Somewhere in the distance, a cow bawled, and the sound grounded her in the reality of the moment. With steady hands, she picked up the pen, her signature. flowed across the page like water over stones, smooth, deliberate, permanent. As she finished the final letter, a sense of rightness settled over her, as if the very land had exhaled in approval. "Well then," James said quietly, adding his own signature as witness. "Welcome home, Miss Mitchell." Thomas stepped forward to add his name, and it was done. Sarah Mitchell, who only yesterday had stood rejected at the station, was now the owner of Blue Mesa Ranch. The weight of the deed in her hands felt like a promise, not just to herself, but to every person whose life was woven into the fabric of this land. And somewhere, deep in her heart, she felt her father smiling. Dawn found Sarah in the study, surrounded by leather-bound ledgers, dating back to the ranch's founding. She'd been up since before first light, her father's pocket watch keeping her company as she pieced together Blue Mesa's financial story. The numbers painted a complex picture, one that explained James's unorthodox decision more clearly than words could have. The ranch was solvent, but only barely. Years of drought had forced James to sell off prime breeding stock. The bottom line had been trending downward for 3 seasons, and this year's cattle prices weren't promising. It wasn't just a ranch she'd inherited, it was a challenge that would test every skill she possessed. A knock at the door interrupted her calculations. Jenny entered, carrying a tray of coffee and biscuits. The housekeeper's grey hair was tied, back severely, but her eyes held a warmth that belied her stern appearance. "You've been at it since before roosters, Miss Mitchell," Jenny said, setting down the tray. "A body needs fuel to think straight." Sarah smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Jenny. And please, call me Sarah." "We'll see about that," Jenny replied, but her tone was kind. "Mr. Blackwood, James, he always said ledgers were best faced on a full stomach." As if summoned by his name, James appeared in the doorway. He'd clearly been up working. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, showing forearms tanned by decades of ranch work. "Found our little secret, have you?" Sarah gestured to the books. "The drought hit harder than you let on yesterday. Didn't want it coloring your decision." He settled into a chair across from her. "Though I suspect you'd have signed anyway." "You're right." Sarah pulled out a particular ledger. "But these numbers from last spring, you sold the prime bulls at half their worth. Why?" James's eyes crinkled. "Testing me already?" "Testing my understanding," she corrected. "Every decision here affects what I can do going forward." "Fair enough." He leaned forward, pointing to a different entry. "Miller's spread north of here. He was about to lose everything. Those bulls at that price let him rebuild his herd. Now he's one of our strongest allies." Sarah nodded slowly. "Building relationships, not just profit." "The land out here," James said, "it's not like back east. We survive by holding each other up. Miller's son is marrying Thomas's niece come spring. His cousin supplies our grain at fair prices, drought or no. It's all connected." A commotion outside drew their attention. Daniel came running up to the porch, out of breath. "Miss Mitchell, the new stallion. He's gotten loose in the south pasture. Marcus says he's working up the mares something fierce." Sarah was on her feet instantly, but James remained seated, watching her. This was her first test as owner, and they both knew it. "Jenny," Sarah called, already moving. "Have Thomas meet me at the stables, Daniel. I need to know exactly which mares are in that pasture." The young hand rattled off names as they strode across the yard. Sarah's mind was already 3 steps ahead. This wasn't just about catching a horse, but about establishing her authority with the hands and protecting valuable breeding stock. She found Thomas already mounted, holding the reins of a second horse. To her surprise, it was Spirit, James's personal mount. The stallion's coat gleamed in the morning sun, his breeding evident in every line. "Mr. Blackwood sent word," Thomas explained. "Said you'd need his best." Sarah swung into the saddle, feeling the horse's eagerness. "The loose stallion, thundercloud. What's his temperament?" "Proud," Thomas answered, spurring his horse alongside hers. "More spirit than sense, if you ask me." They rode hard to the south pasture, where Marcus was keeping watch from the fence. The scene was exactly what Sarah had feared. Thundercloud was harassing the mares, his black coat lathered with sweat. He's working himself into a frenzy, Marcus called. Tried getting close, but he's not having it. Sarah studied the situation, remembering similar challenges from her father's ranch. Thomas, take the east side. Marcus, west. Don't push him. Just hold the boundaries. She gathered her reins. I'll give him something else to think about. What followed was a dance as old as horsemanship itself. Sarah worked Spirit in ever-tightening circles around Thundercloud, drawing the stallion's attention away from the mares. The horse fought her strategy at first, but Spirit's presence demanded respect. Gradually, Thundercloud's movements became less erratic. Sarah kept her pressure steady, neither advancing nor retreating, until finally the stallion stopped, sides heaving, and looked at her with something like recognition. "That's it," she murmured. "Remember who you are." The sun was high when they finally had Thundercloud secured in the barn. Sarah dismounted, feeling the morning's tension ease from her shoulders. She turned to find James leaning against the barn door, his expression unreadable. "Good horse, Spirit," she said, patting the stallion's neck. "Good rider," James replied quietly. "Good leader, too." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift between them. Respect deepening into something. Warmer, though neither was ready to name it. The morning's ledgers seemed far away now, but she understood better than ever that running Blue Mesa would require both head and heart, numbers and instinct, strength and subtlety. She had chosen this life, with all its challenges, and watching Thundercloud settle into his stall, Sarah knew she wouldn't have it any other way. The broken fence post stood like an accusation against the dawn sky. Sarah ran her hand along the splintered wood, feeling the story of its failure in the grain. The entire north line would need replacing before winter, not just a repair, but a complete rebuild. Behind her, she could sense the ranch hands shifting uneasily, waiting to see how she'd handle her first major project. "Won't hold through another season," Marcus said, stating what everyone could see. "Not with snow fence needed, too." The unspoken challenge hung in the air. There wasn't enough manpower to do both. Sarah straightened, brushing dust from her hands. "Thomas, what's your thought on timing?" The old foreman squinted at the horizon. "Snow fence needs to be up in 6 weeks. This here line," he shook his head. "That's 3 weeks of hard work minimum. And the Miller wedding's in 2 weeks." Jenny added from the wagon, where she was distributing morning coffee. Half the hands promised to help with preparations. Sarah felt the weight of all their eyes. This was more than a fence. It was a test of her ability to balance the ranch's needs with its obligations to the community. She reached into her pocket, touching her father's watch for courage. "Show me the snow fence line," she said. They rode out together, the morning sun painting long shadows across the grass. The existing snow fence was a simple affair, posts and rails designed to control drifting. But as Sarah studied the terrain, her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sometimes the obvious solution ain't the right one." "Daniel," she called. To the young hand, "Bring me that map from your saddlebag." Spreading the weathered paper across her saddle, Sarah traced the contours of the land. "Look here. We've been fighting nature, trying to protect the whole valley, but if we redirect the drift pattern," her finger followed a natural ridge, "we can use the land itself to do half our work." Thomas leaned in, his expression shifting from skepticism to consideration. "Save us near half the lumber, too. And half the time," Sarah added, "which means we can tackle both projects." She rolled up the map decisively. "Marcus, ride into town. Tell Henderson at the lumber mill we'll need his best posts, but only half. What we originally planned. Thomas, get the men started on pulling the old north line. We'll reuse what we can." As the hands dispersed, Sarah caught James watching from the rise behind them. He'd been doing that more often lately, observing from a distance, letting her find her own way. But this time, he rode down to join them. "Clever solution," he said, falling in beside her as they rode back. "Though Henderson won't be happy about the reduced lumber order." "Already thought of that," Sarah replied. "We'll need twice as much come spring when we expand the corrals. Better for him to keep our business long term." James chuckled. You're learning the territory's ways quick. Had a good teacher back home, she said softly. My father always said ranching was about reading both the land and the people. They worked through the heat of the day, Sarah right alongside the men. Her hands blistered and healed, then calloused over. The ranch hands' initial reluctance gave way to respect as they saw her skill with a post-hole digger and her willingness to share their labor. By the end of the first week, the new snow fence design was taking shape. Even the skeptics had to admit it worked better than the old way. Sarah overheard Daniel telling Jenny at supper, "Never seen anything like it. She knows her business sure enough." The north line progressed steadily too. Sarah introduced a rotating schedule that let hands alternate between fence work and wedding preparations. It meant longer days for everyone, but no one complained. They could see their new boss shouldering the same burden. One evening, as the sun painted the mountains gold, Sarah found James examining the first completed section of snow fence. His hand ran along the weathered wood, much as hers had done that first morning. "You've won them over," he said without turning. Not just with cleverness, but with respect for what matters to them. Sarah moved to stand beside him, their shoulders almost touching. "The ranch isn't just land and cattle," she said, echoing his words from weeks ago. "It's people, community." "And you?" James asked quietly. "What is it to you?" She looked out over the valley, at the hands heading in for supper, at the cattle grazing peacefully under the evening sky. "It's becoming home," she answered truthfully. His hand found hers briefly, a touch as light as prairie grass in the wind. Then he mounted up, leaving her to watch the sunset paint the new fence line in shades of promise. That night, Sarah added her own entry to the ranch ledger. Not just numbers, but a simple line. "Today we built more than fences." Her father's watch ticked softly beside the book, marking time in a place that was finally beginning to feel like where she belonged. The letter arrived with the morning mail, its expensive paper and precise handwriting at odds with its crude message. Sarah read it twice at her desk, her father's watch ticking steadily beside her, before calling Thomas into the study. "Cattlemen's Association's called a meeting," she said, handing him the letter. "Seems there's concern about Blue Mesa's new management." Thomas's weathered face darkened as he read. "Bradford," he spat the name like a curse. "Always did think he should have gotten this spread when his daughter tried to catch Mr. Blackwood's eye 5 years back." Sarah raised an eyebrow, and Thomas had the grace to look abashed at revealing old gossip. But the information illuminated something she'd been wondering about. Is that why James never married? Local politics? Partly. Thomas handed back the letter, but mostly because he was waiting for someone who saw the ranch the way he did, as something more than just property to acquire. The implications of that statement hung in the air, but Sarah had more immediate concerns. Bradford's gathered quite a few signatures, all demanding a review of the deed transfer. "Legal's legal," Thomas growled. "They can't undo it." "No, but they can make running this place a lot harder." Sarah stood, decision made. "Ride out and find James. He needs to hear this." They found him by the creek, working with Daniel on water management. The young hand had proven eager to learn, and James had taken to teaching him the complex system of water rights that kept peace between neighboring ranches. Sarah watched them for a moment before interrupting. James had a natural way of teaching. Patient, thorough, but expecting excellence. It reminded her of her father, and the thought warmed her even as the letter weighed heavy in her pocket. "James," she called softly, "we need to talk." He read the challenge in her voice and sent Daniel on his way. Sarah handed him the letter without comment, watching his face as he read. His expression hardened but didn't show surprise. "Been expecting something like this," he said finally. "Bradford's had his eye on Blue Mesa's water rights for years, thought he could pressure me into selling after the drought hit, and now he thinks a woman running the ranch gives him another chance to grab. Them." Sarah kept her voice steady, but anger simmered beneath. James's eyes met hers. "You're not just any woman, Sarah. You're the one person in the territory who might actually expand this operation instead of selling it off piece by piece. Is that why you chose me? The question had been burning since Thomas's revelation. I chose you because you have dirt under your nails and ledger ink on your fingers, James said quietly, because you see both the business and the beauty of this land. He paused, something softening in his expression. The fact that you're making Bradford nervous just proves I was right. Thomas, who had been silently watching the exchange, cleared his throat. Meeting's set for Saturday. Whole association will be there. Then we'd better be prepared. Sarah straightened her shoulders. James, I need to know everything, every deal, every agreement, every handshake that's kept peace in this valley. And then, I need you to let me handle this my way. A smile touched James's lips. Your way seems to be working out just fine so far. They spent the afternoon in the study, James and Thomas taking turns, explaining the complex web of relationships that made up the territory's ranching community. Sarah took careful notes, her mind already forming a strategy. Bradford's not wrong. About one thing, James said as the sun began to set. Water rights are everything out here. Blue Mesa controls the headwaters that feed 3 other ranches. My father taught me that such power comes with responsibility. Your father sounds like a wise man, Sarah said softly. He was. Taught me that true strength isn't in what you can take, but in what you can share while still staying strong. James stood, moving to the window. Bradford never understood that. He sees every deal as a chance to grab more power. Sarah joined him at the window, watching the evening light paint the creek silver. Then maybe it's time someone taught him a different way of doing business. James turned to her, and in the fading light, she saw something new in his eyes. Not just respect or approval, but a deeper warmth that made her heart skip. I have a feeling Saturday's meeting is going to be quite memorable. It will be, Sarah promised, her hand finding her father's watch. Because we're not just fighting for Blue Mesa anymore. We're fighting for everything it stands for. As they stood there, the setting sun casting long shadows across the study, Sarah felt the weight of the challenge ahead. But she also felt something else, the strength of the man beside her, the loyalty of the hands who'd come to trust her, and her own growing conviction that this land, this life, was worth any fight that came her way. The Cattlemen's Association meeting hall was thick with pipe smoke and tension when Sarah entered. She carried her mother's old recipe book under her arm, a peculiar choice that had raised Thomas's eyebrows that morning, but one that was central to her strategy. James had offered to accompany her, but she'd declined. This was her battle to fight. Bradford sat at the head of the long table, his expensive Eastern suit out of place among the weathered ranchers. His daughter Eleanor perched beside him, her pretty face set in poorly concealed disdain. Around them sat 20 of the territory's most influential ranchers, their combined holdings representing nearly 500,000 acres. Miss Mitchell, Bradford's voice dripped false courtesy, how kind of you to join us, though traditionally these meetings are for property owners. Sarah set her recipe book on the table with deliberate care. Then I'm exactly where I should be, Mr. Bradford, or did you miss the deed registration at the county office? A few chuckles scattered through the room. Bradford's face tightened. The legitimacy of that deed transfer is precisely why we're here. The association has concerns about Blue Mesa's future under such unusual management. Unusual? Sarah kept her voice level. I wasn't aware that competence had a gender, Mr. Bradford, but since you mention the future, let's discuss it. She opened the recipe book, and several men leaned forward, curious. My mother taught me that a good ranch wife keeps 2 kinds of books, Sarah continued, her finger tracing down a page. One for feeding bodies, and one for feeding the future. This here's her book of agreements. Every handshake deal, every water-sharing arrangement, every grazing agreement made over coffee and pie in her kitchen. She turned to a specific page. Like this one, from 75. The Bradford spread was suffering from drought. Blue Mesa shared water rights for 3 seasons, asking only fair consideration in return. Her eyes met Bradford's. A consideration you seem to have forgotten. Color rose in Bradford's face. Ancient history has no bearing. Oh, but it does. Sarah interrupted smoothly, because ranching out here isn't just about who owns what paper. It's about who honors their words, who remembers their debts, who understands that we all survive by helping each other through the hard times. She looked around the table, meeting each man's eyes. You all knew James Blackwood as a fair man. He chose me to carry on that legacy, not because I'm a woman, but because I understand what he built here. A network of trust and mutual support that's worth more than all the water rights in Wyoming. Eleanor Bradford's voice cut in, sharp as a whip. Pretty words don't change the fact that you're an outsider who somehow convinced James to what, exactly? Sarah's tone could have frozen a summer stream. To trust someone who sees ranching as more than a way to acquire power. To choose a successor who's actually worked the land instead of just profiting from it. Old Man Miller, whose spread bordered Blue Mesa to the north, cleared his throat. Bradford, way I hear it, her innovations with the snow fence design saved half the lumber costs. My boy says she's out there working alongside the hands, knowing every acre like she was born to it, and she honored the agreement about the Miller. Wedding preparations, another rancher added, kept her word even while rebuilding the north line fence. Sarah opened her recipe book to another page. Speaking of agreements, I've been reviewing the water sharing arrangements. I see opportunities to improve efficiency for everyone's benefit. She began laying out a plan that would increase water access for 3 neighboring ranches, while actually reducing Blue Mesa's maintenance costs. As she spoke, she saw the shift in the room. These men might have come ready to support Bradford's power play, but they were businessmen first. Her proposal made sense, and more importantly, it showed she understood the delicate balance of cooperation that made ranching possible in this unforgiving land. Bradford tried one last gambit. The deed transfer itself was irregular, no payment recorded, The payment was in trust, Sarah cut in quietly. Trust that I would honor what James Blackwood spent 30 years building. Trust that I would see Blue Mesa not as property to exploit, but as a responsibility to uphold. She closed the recipe book gently. Now, gentlemen, shall we vote on my membership in this association, or should we discuss how my water management proposal can benefit all our spreads before the summer's out? The vote was unanimous, save for Bradford and his daughter. As Sarah left the hall, she heard Old Man Miller say, James sure knew what he was doing with this one. Outside, she found James waiting with the wagon, his face questioning. Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Mama always said the quickest way to a man's sense was through his memory of deals made over good food and fair words. James helped her. Up to the seat, his hand lingering on hers. You've done more than win their votes, Sarah. You've won their respect. As they drove back toward Blue Mesa, Sarah felt the recipe book in her lap. Her mother's wisdom merged with her father's watch. In her pocket, guiding her toward a future that felt more right with each passing day. The storm came without warning, rolling down from the mountains like God's own fury. Sarah stood in the barn doorway, watching lightning split the afternoon sky into jagged pieces. Her father's watch read just past 3, but the darkness made it feel like dusk. Never seen one build this fast, Thomas said beside her, his voice nearly lost in a crack of thunder. Got half the herd up in Highland Pass too. Sarah felt the pressure drop as another storm cell approached. She'd seen this pattern before, back home in Colorado. Those cattle come down now, or we lose them. Daniel, she called to the young hand rushing past. Get word to James. We need every rider we've got. The barn erupted into activity. Jenny appeared with rain slickers and ropes, her usual precise manner giving way to urgent efficiency. Through the open doors, Sarah could see the new snow fence straining against the wind. Marcus, take 4 men and secure that fence line, she ordered. If it breaks, we'll have drifts clear to the creek come winter. She turned to Thomas. How many riders can you spare for the herd? The old foreman did quick calculations. 8, including yourself. James will make 9 when he gets here. Sarah nodded, already planning. Split into 3 groups. The hurdle fragment in this weather. We need to cover all the descent paths. Thunder boomed overhead as they mounted up. Spirit, whom James had insisted she keep using, danced beneath her, sensing the electricity in the air. Sarah gave him his head for a moment, letting him know she understood his anxiety but expected his courage. They rode out into stinging rain, the wind cutting through their slickers like icy knives. Sarah led her group up the western trail, the horses struggling. Against the mud, above them lightning illuminated the pass in stark flashes, revealing glimpses of panicked cattle. "There!" she shouted over the wind. A group of steers had broken away, heading toward treacherous ground. Sarah spurred Spirit forward, feeling him respond with all his breeding and training. They cut through the storm like a knife, reaching the cattle just as they approached the cliff edge. Hours blurred together in a chaos of rain, mud, and desperate maneuvers. Sarah lost count of how many times they turned the cattle back from danger, how many close calls they survived. Her world narrowed to the rhythm of Spirit's movements, the sound of her own voice cutting through the storm, the trust she placed in her horse and her hands. Through it all, she caught glimpses of James working the eastern slope, his experience showing in every move he made. Once their eyes met across a ravine, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose, shared courage, shared dedication to the land and its demands. The crisis point came near dusk. The main herd, finally driven down to lower ground, spooked at a massive lightning strike. Sarah saw the stampede beginning, saw James and two others in its path. Without thinking, she drove Spirit straight into the herd's flank, splitting their momentum. James understood instantly, working with her to create a corridor of escape. When it was over, they found themselves in the valley bottom, soaked to the skin, but with the herd intact. The storm was moving east, leaving behind a landscape transformed by mud and debris. Sarah did a quick count of riders, all present, though Daniel sported a nasty gash on his arm. "Jenny's got the surgery warm," James said, riding up beside her. His face was streaked with mud, but his eyes held a fierce pride. "Did a head count as they came down. We didn't lose a single one." Sarah felt the exhaustion then, but also something else, a deep satisfaction that came from facing nature's worst alongside people she trusted. "The snow fence?" "Standing strong," Marcus reported, appearing through the gloom. "Though we lost part of the barn roof." They rode back together, the tired horses picking their way through the mud. Sarah saw lights in neighboring spreads, reminding her that they weren't alone in this fight. Already she was planning. Which hands would help Miller check his herd tomorrow? Who would ride to Bradford's to make sure they had enough hands for repairs? At the barn, James helped her dismount, his strong hands steady despite the day's trials. "You rode like you were born in that saddle," he said softly. "I had a good horse under me," Sarah replied, patting Spirit's mud-caked neck, "and good people beside me." They stood there a moment, the air between them charged with something more powerful than the storm's electricity. Then Jenny called from the house about hot coffee and bandages needed, breaking the spell. Later, after all the hands were tended to and fed, Sarah made an entry in the ranch ledger. Beyond the numbers of cattle saved and damages sustained, she wrote, "Today, Blue Mesa's heart proved stronger than the storm." She closed the book and listened to the rain's gentle aftermath, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new repairs, new opportunities to prove that a ranch's true strength lay in its people. Morning after the storm broke gentle and clear, the kind of day that made you forget nature's fury was ever possible. Sarah stood on the repaired barn roof, hammering the last shingle into place as she surveyed her domain. The valley gleamed like newly minted silver, mud already drying in the warm sun. Below, James's silver spurs caught the light as he dismounted. He'd been out since dawn, riding the boundaries and checking on neighboring ranches. Sarah watched him pause to speak, with Daniel, who was sporting a fresh bandage but insisted on working. The young hand's eager nod and straight shoulders spoke of growing confidence. He was becoming a real rancher under their guidance. "Miss Sarah," Jenny called from below. "Telegraph from the cattle buyer just came. They're still expecting us next week, storm or no storm." Sarah climbed down, accepting the telegram and a cup of coffee from the housekeeper. The cattle drive couldn't wait. Prices were peak now, and they needed the income before winter. But the storm had changed everything, from trail conditions to the cattle's temperament. "Thomas," she called to the foreman as he passed, "we need to talk drive strategy. Gather the hands for supper meeting?" He nodded, then hesitated. "Been thinking about the route. That washout near Copper Creek's gonna be trouble." "Already solved," James said, joining them. "Miller's offered to let us cross his south pasture. Says it's repayment for our help with his scattered herd yesterday." Sarah smiled, remembering her mother's wisdom about kindness coming back around. The recipe book had proven prophetic in more ways than one. That evening, the main house's dining room became a war room. Jenny had outdone herself with a hearty stew, and the hands gathered around the big table, their usual mealtime banter replaced with focused discussion. Sarah stood at the head of the table, spreading out trail maps marked with recent storm damage. 200 head to move," she began. 6 days to the railhead if we push it. The storm changed our usual route, but opened some new possibilities." James sat quietly at her right hand, his spurs silent now, letting her lead but present if needed. The gesture wasn't lost on the hands. This was her drive to run, her chance to prove Blue Mesa could thrive under her guidance. "Daniel," she turned to the young hand, "you've earned your spurs. I want you riding flank, learning from Marcus." The boy's face lit up, then turned serious with responsibility. Marcus, the experienced roper, gave an approving nod. The other, hands straightened, sensing the importance of the moment. This wasn't just about moving cattle, it was about Blue Mesa's future, about proving a woman-run ranch could match any in the territory. "We'll need extra hands," Thomas pointed out. "Storm's got everyone short-handed." "Already arranged," Sarah replied. "Bradford's boy is lending us 3 of his best men." A murmur went through the room. After the association meeting, Bradford's cooperation was unexpected. James raised an eyebrow, and Sarah allowed herself a small smile. "Amazing what can happen when you remind folks about debts of honor," she said quietly. "Bradford's boy has more sense than his father, sees the value of rebuilding bridges." The meeting continued as the sun set, each rider receiving their assignment, each potential problem addressed. Sarah felt the rhythm of it, the way each person contributed their knowledge, their concerns, their solutions. This was ranching at its heart, not just managing land and cattle, but orchestrating a complex dance of people and nature. Later, as the hands filed out, James lingered. He removed his spurs and placed them on the table between them. In the lamplight, their silver. Surfaces told stories of countless rides, countless drives, countless decisions that had built Blue Mesa. "These were my father's," he said softly. "He gave them to me on my first drive as trail boss, said they weren't about showing off or making noise, but about the music of work done right." He pushed them toward her. "They belong to Blue Mesa's. E boss now?" Sarah touched the spurs gently, understanding the weight of what he offered. Not just tools, but tradition, trust, and something more personal that neither of them was quite ready to name. "I'll wear them with honor," she said. "You already have," he replied, and in his eyes she saw the same future she'd been dreaming of, one where Blue Mesa thrived, where tradition and progress danced together like wind through prairie grass, where 2 people who loved the land could build something lasting. Outside, a chuck wagon was being loaded for the drive, horses were being chosen and checked, supplies counted and stored. The hands moved with purpose, their confidence in their new boss proven by storm and strengthened by respect. Sarah listened to the symphony of preparation and knew that whatever challenges the trail might bring, Blue Mesa's heart was strong and its future secure. The old photograph fell from between the pages of a ledger as Sarah was preparing the books for the cattle drive. Sepia-toned and carefully preserved, it showed a younger James in military uniform, standing beside a distinguished older man in rancher's clothes. Their matching eyes and proud bearing left no doubt they were father and son. Sarah was still studying it when James appeared in the study doorway. He paused, seeing the photograph in her hands, then entered and closed the door. Behind him, "Taken right before I left for the war," he said quietly, settling into the chair across from her. "Father wanted a proper portrait, said a man should be remembered at his best. You came back to run the ranch." Sarah kept her voice gentle, sensing the weight of memory in his words. "Came back to bury him." James's eyes held distant pain. "Influenza took him while I was fighting in Virginia. By the time I reached home, Thomas and the hands had kept things running, but," he gestured at the ledgers surrounding them, "Father always said a ranch was more than just numbers. It was about legacy, about building something that outlasted yourself." Sarah thought of her own father's watch, ticking steadily in her pocket. "Is that why you never sold, even during the worst of the drought?" "Partly." James stood, moving to the window where the evening sun painted the mountains in shades of amber. "Father built this place understanding something Bradford never learned, that true wealth isn't in what you own, but in what you nurture. Every hand he hired, every neighbor he helped, every agreement made on a handshake, it all went into making Blue Mesa more than just acres and cattle." Sarah joined him at the window, the photograph still in her hand. "And now you've passed that legacy to a stranger." "No." His voice was soft but certain. "To someone who understands what it means. I watched you that first day at the station, Sarah. You didn't just want land, you wanted to build something lasting. Every decision you've made since has proven I was right." The setting sun caught the silver in his hair, reminding her of how time passed, how choices shaped lives. "Your father would be proud," she said, "not just of what you built, but of how you chose to preserve it." James turned to her then, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "There's more to preserve than just the ranch, Sarah. More to build than just a business." The space between them seemed to shrink, charged with unspoken possibilities. Sarah felt the weight of his father's spurs on her belt, the significance of the photograph in her hand, the way their shared vision for Blue Mesa had grown into something deeper. A knock at the door broke the moment. Jenny entered with coffee and a concerned expression. "Telegraph from the railhead, Miss Sarah. Storm damage has the trains running 2 days behind." Sarah shifted smoothly back into ranch business, though she felt James's gaze linger. "That actually helps us. Gives the trails time to dry out before we move the herd." They spent the next hour adjusting drive schedules and feed calculations, but something had changed. The photograph sat on the desk between them, a reminder of foundations built and futures waiting to be shaped. Later, as James prepared to leave for his evening ride, he paused in the doorway. "Father's birthday would have been next week. I usually ride up to Summit Point. You can see the whole ranch from there. Would you join me?" The invitation carried weight beyond a simple ride. Sarah thought of all the layers of history and hope bound up in Blue Mesa, of how James had entrusted her with not just his land, but his father's dream. "I'd be honored," she said softly. After he left, Sarah carefully placed the photograph back in the ledger. But first, she noted the way young James stood in his uniform, straight-backed and clear-eyed, already carrying the sense of responsibility that would shape his life. The same sense she felt now, not just for the ranch's success, but for the happiness of the man who had trusted her with his legacy. She touched her father's watch, thinking how proud he would be to see her now, not just surviving, but building something meaningful. The harvest moon was rising over Blue Mesa, full and golden, promising abundance for those who worked with faith and patience. In the distance, she heard James's horse heading out on boundary patrol. Tomorrow would bring the challenges of the cattle drive, but tonight, under the harvest moon, Sarah allowed herself to dream of more than just business success. She dreamed of a future where legacy and love might grow together, as natural as prairie grass after rain. The land dispute notice arrived on a wind-whipped autumn morning, carried by a nervous young lawyer from the territorial office. Sarah recognized Bradford's influence in the carefully worded challenge to Blue Mesa's northern boundary lines. A clever attack disguised as a simple administrative review. She found James in the barn, helping Daniel repair tack for the winter season. His hands stilled on the leather when he saw the official document in her grip, understanding in an instant that their peace was about to be tested. Bradford's claiming the survey markers were moved during last spring's floods, Sarah explained, spreading the document on a weathered workbench. If the territorial office accepts his evidence, we'd lose access to the upper creek. James's jaw tightened. That creek's been Blue Mesa water since my grandfather's time. We've got the original surveys in the study, which is why Bradford's timing is deliberate, Sarah said, her finger tracing the document's date. He's waited until most of the old-timers who remember the original boundaries are gone. Even Thomas was just a boy when those markers were set. Daniel, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. My pa used to say Bradford never met a piece of paper he couldn't twist to his advantage. James nodded approvingly at the young hand's insight. Go fetch Thomas. He'll want to hear this. Once Daniel had gone, James moved closer to Sarah, his voice low. I should have warned you. Bradford's tried this before, different angles, always in autumn, when ranches are vulnerable before winter. You couldn't have known he'd try again so soon. Sarah touched his arm gently. But I need to understand. What happened last time? A shadow crossed James's face. 5 years ago, he claimed grazing rights on our south meadow. I was distracted. His daughter Eleanor was always around, hinting at marriage, while Bradford worked to undermine our boundaries. By the time I saw the pattern, we almost lost 50 acres. The piece of his past clicked into place. Why he'd stayed single, why he'd been so careful about trusting the ranch to someone who understood its value beyond mere property. Thomas arrived with Daniel, his weathered face darkening at the sight of the dispute notice. Should have known Bradford wouldn't let that association meeting be the end of it. He's counting on the new territorial judge not knowing the history, Sarah said. But there might be an advantage in that. James, where are those original surveys? They moved to the study, where decades of Blue Mesa's paperwork lived in careful order. While James and Thomas searched for the surveys, Sarah opened her mother's recipe book, turning to a section she'd added herself. Here, she said, drawing their attention. Notes from Mrs. Bradford's quilting circle. 3 years before the flood, Bradford's claiming moved the markers. She specifically mentions the creek boundary because they gathered watercress there. James's eyes lit with understanding. Social history, not just legal documents. Bradford wouldn't think to challenge that. No man ever paid proper attention to women's gossip, Thomas added with a knowing smile. Begging your pardon, Miss Sarah? None needed, she replied. My mother taught me that real history lives in everyday details. Now we need more. Jenny might remember other quilting circle stories. And Daniel, didn't you say your grandmother was a schoolteacher here? The young hand nodded eagerly. She kept journals, wrote down everything about the territory. Get them, Sarah ordered, and Thomas, ride to Miller's spread. His wife's family goes back 3 generations here. They must have records, letters, something that mentions the creek boundary. As the men dispersed on their missions, James stayed behind, watching Sarah with a mixture of admiration and something deeper. You're fighting Bradford with history he doesn't even know exists. I'm fighting him with truth, she corrected softly. Not just legal truth, but the kind written in people's lives. Blue Mesa isn't just marks on a map. It's part of this community's story. James moved closer, taking her hand. Our story now. The bee's touch sent warmth through Sarah's chest, but before she could respond, Jenny appeared with a box of old letters. Found these in the attic. Mrs. Blackwood, James's mother, she wrote to my aunt every month for 30 years. They spent the evening piecing together Blue Mesa's history through women's words, letters, journals, recipe notes, and quilting circle records. Each document added another thread to the tapestry of truth they were weaving, each personal detail, reinforcing the legitimacy of the boundaries Bradford sought to challenge. As the lamp burned low, Sarah felt James's hand find hers again. Outside, the autumn wind sang through prairie grass that had grown on rightfully claimed land for generations. Together, they would make sure it stayed that way, protecting not just boundaries on a map, but the legacy of lives lived and recorded in 1,000 quiet ways. The first frost painted Blue Mesa in silver and silence, transforming the world overnight. Sarah stood on the porch at dawn, her father's watch marking time as the sun crept over mountains already dusted with snow. The ranch's preparations for winter were nearly complete, but experience had taught her that nature had little respect for human schedules. Jenny appeared beside her, offering coffee and wearing the quilted shawl that had become part of Blue Mesa's story during their boundary dispute research. "Coldest morning yet," the housekeeper observed. "Might be our last chance to finish the high pasture fencing before real winter sets in." Sarah nodded, thinking of the work ahead. The boundary dispute had delayed their usual winter preparations, making every remaining day crucial. "Have the hands eaten?" James saw to that at first light. "They're waiting in the barn." Jenny's voice held approval. "He's been right there, beside them every morning, like he's got something to prove. Or someone to prove it to," Sarah thought, though she kept that reflection to herself. James had thrown himself into the winter preparations with an energy that spoke of more than just ranch ownership. Every shared task, every problem solved together, seemed to draw them closer in ways that went beyond business. In the barn, she found the hands gathered around James, who was sketching a work plan in the dust of the floor. He looked up as she entered, and their eyes met with the easy familiarity that had grown between them. "The North Ridge needs attention first," he was saying. "That new snow fence won't mean much if we can't get the cattle down from high ground before the storms." "Hit! We'll need every hand we can spare," Sarah added, joining the circle. "Daniel, ride over to Miller's, see if they can lend us 2 men for the day. Thomas, check our supplies. I want emergency packs on every rider, in case the weather turns." The hands dispersed to their tasks, leaving Sarah and James alone in the barn's morning shadows. He stood, brushing dust from his hands, and she noticed the stiffness in his movements. "Your old wound's bothering you," she said softly. "It wasn't a question. War leaves its marks," he admitted. "Cold weather just reminds us where they are." Sarah reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a small tin. "Jenny's liniment. She mentioned you'd been refusing it." James's expression softened. "Didn't want anyone worrying." "Caring isn't the same as worrying," she corrected, pressing the tin into his hand. Their fingers touched, lingered, spoke volumes. In the quiet moment, the day unfolded in a rhythm of shared work and unspoken understanding. Sarah and James rode the high pastures together, their horses' breath clouding in the crisp air as they checked fence lines and guided cattle toward lower ground. Every so often, she caught him watching her, not evaluating anymore, but appreciating, as if seeing his life's work through new eyes. By afternoon, clouds were building over the mountains. The hands worked faster, sensing the approaching weather. Sarah felt the change in the air, the way the wind carried the promise of snow. "We'll finish the essential sections," she called to Thomas. "The rest can wait until this weather passes." James rode up beside her, his experienced eye measuring the sky. "Storm's coming faster than expected. We should get everyone down while we still have light." They worked in seamless coordination, bringing the hands and cattle down from the high pasture just as the first snow began to fall. By the time they reached the ranch, the world was white and wild, the wind driving snow in horizontal sheets. In the warmth of the main house, Jenny had prepared hot coffee and stew for the returning workers. Sarah watched as James helped Daniel with his frozen boots, showing the young hand tricks learned from long experience with Wyoming winters. Later, after the hands had gone to their quarters and Jenny had retired, Sarah found James in the study. He stood by the window, watching the storm transform their world. "I used to dread the first winter storm," he said without turning. "Not because of the cold or the work, but because it reminded me how alone I was in carrying Blue Mesa's weight." Sarah moved to stand beside him, their shoulders touching. And now, he turned to her then, his eyes holding the warmth that had grown between them through shared challenges and quiet moments. "Now I'm reminded that some burdens are lighter when shared. Some dreams grow stronger when someone else believes in them." The storm raged outside, but in the study's lamplight, Sarah felt the truth of his words. She thought of her father's watch, of James's silver spurs, of all the symbols of trust and tradition that had brought them to this moment. "I believe in more than just the dream," she said softly. James's hand found hers, warm and sure. Outside, snow continued to fall on Blue Mesa, but inside, two hearts beat with the certainty of coming spring. Sarah found her mother's locket while unpacking winter clothes, its golden surface tarnished, but still beautiful. Inside, two worn photographs faced each other, her parents on their wedding day, young and full of dreams about the ranch they would build together. The discovery stirred memories and questions that had been simmering since the first frost. The morning sun cast long shadows across the study as she worked on the ledgers, the locket now resting beside her father's watch. James entered quietly, carrying coffee and the easy familiarity that had grown between them over the months. "Jenny said you've been up since before dawn," he said, setting a cup beside her. "Something troubling you?" Sarah touched the locket, choosing her words carefully. "I found this while going through my things. Got me thinking about my parents, how they built their life together, not just as ranchers, but as partners." Understanding dawned in James's eyes. Since the winter storm, they'd been dancing around the growing feelings between them, both aware that any step forward would change more than just their personal lives. "Sarah," he began, but she held up a hand. "I need to ask something, James. That day at the station, was it just about finding someone to run Blue Mesa, or did you see something more?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. James moved to the window, his reflection ghostly in the frost-touched glass. "I saw someone who understood what this land means, someone who could carry on what my father built." He turned back to her. "But I never expected to find someone who would make me want to build something new." Sarah stood, her heart beating faster. "And now I find myself watching you with these hands, with this land, and seeing not just a capable ranch owner, but—" He hesitated, then pressed on. "But a woman who makes me question every reason I had for staying alone all these years." The confession brought both warmth and worry to Sarah's heart. "The ranch comes first, James. We both know that. If we complicate things, is that what you're afraid of?" He stepped closer. "That personal feelings might compromise what we've built here?" Sarah touched her mother's locket. "My parents taught me that ranching takes everything you've got. Every decision affects not just us, but everyone who depends on Blue Mesa. They also showed you that love can strengthen, not weaken. A ranch." James's voice was gentle. "I've watched you these past months, Sarah. Every choice you've made has proven you understand the responsibility I handed you. But somewhere along the way, you became more than just Blue Mesa's future." A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas entered, his weathered face concerned. "Territorial judge is here about the boundary dispute. Bradford's with him." The moment broke, reality intruding on personal matters. Sarah straightened, ranch owner once more. "We'll continue this later?" James nodded, but caught her hand before she could leave. "Some things are worth the risk, Sarah. Some partnerships strengthen everything they touch." The judge waited in the front room, a stern man with keen eyes that missed nothing, including the way James stood supportively at Sarah's shoulder. Bradford's presence was like a storm cloud, dark with suppressed anger. As Sarah presented their evidence, the women's letters, the quilting circle records, the school teachers' journals, She felt the strength of James beside her, not overshadowing but supporting. Their shared knowledge of Blue Mesa's history and their commitment to its future wove through every word. The judge's decision was clear. The boundary lines stood. Bradford left without a word, but his expression promised this wouldn't be the end. Later, in the quiet of evening, Sarah returned to the study. The locket lay where she'd left it, gleaming softly in the lamplight. James found her there, standing in the doorway as if waiting for permission to cross more than just a physical threshold. "You were magnificent today," he said softly. "Not just knowledgeable, but passionate about protecting what matters." Sarah opened the locket, looking at her parents' happy faces. They built something beautiful together, didn't they? Not just a ranch, but a life. James moved to stand beside her, his presence warm and sure. "We could do the same, Sarah. Build on what they started, what my father created, but make it our own." She turned to face him, seeing in his eyes the same dream that had been growing in her heart. "It won't be easy. The ranch will always need us, always demand our best. Together," he said simply, taking her hand. "Everything we've faced has been better together." The locket's golden surface caught the last rays of sun, casting a warm glow like a blessing from the past. Outside, Blue Mesa stretched white and endless under winter stars, offering not just responsibility now, but the promise of a future where love and legacy could grow as one. Spring came to Blue Mesa like a painter working in slow strokes, turning brown to green, ice to flowing water. Sarah stood at the branding corral, watching Daniel demonstrate her new cattle marking system to visiting ranchers. The young hand had grown confident over the winter, and now he explained the innovative process with pride. "See how the new brand pattern lets us track bloodlines?" Daniel pointed to the slight modification Sarah had added to Blue Mesa's traditional mark. "Makes it easier to manage breeding programs, especially with the new strain of cattle we're bringing in." James appeared at Sarah's shoulder, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cool morning air. "Miller's asking about adopting the system for his spread," he murmured. "Says it'll revolutionize how we track heredity in the territory." Sarah smiled, remembering the night she'd sketched out the idea in the study, James offering suggestions while they worked late into the evening. Their partnership had deepened through the winter months, personal and professional lines blurring into something stronger than either alone. "Speaking of Miller," she said, turning to face James, "his offer on that South Valley grazing land, I think we should accept." James raised an eyebrow. "Thought you wanted to expand our own grazing?" "I did. But look at this." She pulled out a carefully drawn map from her coat pocket. "If we lease that land to Miller, but share water rights, we can focus on developing the North Valley. Better soil there for the new grass seed we're testing." He studied the map, and Sarah watched understanding dawn in his eyes. The plan would strengthen both ranches while preserving resources for future growth. It was the kind of long-term thinking that had drawn them together in the first place. "Clever," he said softly. "Like something my father would have done. Like something we're doing," she corrected gently. Together. Their eyes met, and Sarah felt the familiar flutter in her chest. Since their conversation over her mother's locket, something had shifted between them. Every shared decision, every problem solved as partners, drew them closer to an inevitable conclusion. Thomas interrupted with news about the spring cattle count. The numbers were better than expected. Sarah's breeding program was already showing results. As they discussed the figures, she noticed James watching her with quiet pride. Later, they rode out to inspect the North Valley. The spring sun warmed their shoulders as their horses picked their way through new grass. Sarah had worn James's silver spurs, their gentle jingling a reminder of the legacy they now shared. "I've been thinking," James said, as they crested a rise overlooking the valley, "about the future, about changes." Sarah's heart quickened, but she kept her voice steady. "What kind of changes?" He guided his horse closer to hers, the kind that make official what we've both known for months now, the kind that turn partnership into, he hesitated, then pressed on, into family. Sarah turned to him, seeing in his face the same mix of hope and certainty she felt in her own heart. "James, let me finish," he said gently. "I watched you all winter, leading these hands, innovating, building on everything my father created. You've made Blue Mesa more than I ever dreamed it could be. But more than that, you've made me realize what I've been missing all these years." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small box. "I had this made in town, the silvers from my mother's favorite brooch, but the design—" He opened it to reveal a ring that incorporated elements of both their cattle brands, woven together, in an eternal circle. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, understanding the symbolism, the way it represented both their ranching heritage and their shared future. "I'm not just asking you to marry me," James continued. "I'm asking you to help me write the next chapter of Blue Mesa's story, not as owner and predecessor, but as true partners in everything." Sarah looked out over the valley, where new grass promised summer abundance. She thought of her parents' ranch, of James's father's legacy, of all the threads of history that had woven together to bring them to this moment. She touched her father's watch, then reached for the ring. "Partners," she said softly. "In everything." James slipped the ring onto her finger, and its weight felt right, like the final piece of a long-forming picture falling into place. Below them, Blue Mesa stretched out like a promise, its future as bright as the spring sun, catching on her new ring. They rode home together, planning and dreaming, their horses walking close enough for their legs to touch. The ranch hands, seeing the ring, exchanged knowing smiles. Jenny wiped tears with her apron, and Thomas cleared his throat gruffly before shaking James's hand. That evening, Sarah added a new entry to the ranch ledger. Beyond the day's figures and calculations, she wrote, "Today, two brands became one, and Blue Mesa's future grew broader than any horizon." The ring on Sarah's finger caught the early morning light as she read Bradford's latest letter. The paper was expensive, the words carefully chosen, but the message was clear. Surrender Blue Mesa's water rights or face a coordinated campaign to undermine the ranch's standing with cattle buyers across 3 territories. James found her in the study, her father's watch open beside the letter. One look at her face told him everything. "Bradford's made his move. He's organized a consortium of wealthy ranchers," Sarah said, passing him the letter. "They're threatening to spread word that our breeding program is unsound, that our stock is weakened. They'll poison our reputation with every buyer from here to Chicago." James read quickly, his jaw tightening. This is more than Bradford's usual schemes. Someone's backing him with serious money. "Eleanor," Sarah's voice was certain, "I heard from Jenny that she's engaged to a railroad magnate's son. This isn't just about water rights anymore. It's about building an empire." The sound of hooves interrupted them. Thomas appeared in the doorway, his expression grave. "Miller's here. Says it's urgent." They found their neighbor in the front room, his usually ruddy face pale with worry. "Just got word from the cattle buyers in Cheyenne. They're canceling contracts with anyone who does business with Blue Mesa. Bradford's people got to them somehow." Sarah felt James's hand touch her back, steadying her. "How many ranches are affected?" "Half. Dozens so far. More by sunset, I expect." Miller twisted his hat in his hands. "Some folks are already talking about pulling out of our water-sharing agreements. Can't afford to lose their contracts." Sarah exchanged a look with James. This was Bradford's true attack, not just on Blue Mesa, but on the entire network of cooperation they'd built. Without those agreements, smaller ranches would fail, leaving their land ripe for Bradford's consortium to acquire. "Call a meeting," Sarah said firmly. "Everyone who shares our water. Today." "Sarah," James cautioned, "if they're already spooked, then we need to show them something worth believing in." She touched her ring, feeling the merged brands under her fingers. "Miller, spread the word. Noon, main house." And send Daniel to town. I need every ledger from the bank going back 10 years. The next hours were a blur of preparation. Jenny organized a meal for 30, understanding that breaking bread together could soften hard hearts. Thomas and the hands prepared the barn for the meeting, while Sarah and James pored over ledgers and water tables. As noon approached, wagons and riders appeared on every trail leading to Blue Mesa. Sarah watched them arrive, noting the worry on their faces, the way they gathered in uncertain clusters. These were good people, proud ranchers who'd built their lives on trust and cooperation. James stood beside her on the porch. "Ready?" She squeezed his hand in answer, then stepped forward to address the crowd. "I know why you're scared," she began, her voice carrying across the yard. "Bradford's consortium offers a simple choice: abandon Blue Mesa or lose everything. But they're wrong about what makes a ranch succeed." She held up her mother's recipe. "Look, in here are 30 years of agreements, deals made over coffee and sealed with handshakes. They tell a story not about water rights or cattle prices, but about how we survive out here, together." Moving to a table laden with ledgers and maps, Sarah laid out her vision. She showed how their shared water rights had helped everyone survive the drought, how their cooperative breeding programs had strengthened all their herds. Then she revealed her master stroke. Blue Mesa's new breeding system isn't just a tracking method. It's proof of bloodline quality that no buyer can ignore. With our combined herds, we can guarantee quality that Bradford's consortium can't match. We don't need their buyers. We can create our own market. The ranchers listened intently as Sarah detailed her plan. It would require trust, cooperation, and shared risk, everything that had always made their community strong. One by one, heads began to nod. Old Man Miller stood up. "Bradford offered me twice market rate for my water rights this morning. Told him he could keep his money. Blue Mesa's always dealt fair with us, and that's worth more than gold." Others voiced their agreement. The meeting turned from crisis to strategy session, with ranchers offering suggestions and support. Sarah felt James's quiet pride beside her as she worked with their neighbors to build something even stronger than before. As the sun set, the last wagon departed. Sarah stood in the barn doorway, watching dust trails disappear into the distance. James wrapped his arms around her from behind. "You didn't just save Blue Mesa today," he said softly. "You showed them a future bigger than Bradford could ever imagine." Sarah leaned back against him, feeling the strength of their partnership. "We showed them," she corrected. "Everything we build here, we build together." Above them, the evening star appeared, bright as hope, steady as love, promising tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to face them together. The wedding bands lay nestled in Jenny's grandmother's handkerchief, their simple gold surfaces reflecting the afternoon light. Sarah touched them gently, thinking how they echoed the merged cattle brands in her engagement ring. Like everything, at Blue Mesa, they spoke of both tradition and new beginnings. "Your mother would have loved this," Jenny said softly, arranging wildflowers in the study. The usually practical housekeeper had tears in her eyes. "A wedding that brings the whole territory together." Sarah smiled, watching riders approach from every direction. The ceremony wouldn't be until sunset, but ranchers were arriving early, bringing food and fellowship. Even Bradford's threat had served a purpose, strengthening bonds between neighbors who now saw themselves as part of something larger than individual spreads. "Thomas says the last contracts came in from the new Buyers Association," Jenny continued. "Better prices than Bradford's people ever offered." "Because they're buying more than just cattle," Sarah replied. "They're buying our reputation for quality, our proven bloodlines." She touched her father's watch. "Dad always said the best business was built on trust." A knock at the door revealed Daniel, looking uncomfortable in his Sunday best. "Mr. James asked me to give you this." He handed over a small package wrapped in brown paper, said it was tradition. Inside, Sarah found a delicate silver chain holding a miniature version of the original Blue Mesa brand. A note in James's steady hand read, "To remind you of where we started and how far we've come." Meet me at sunset. J. The afternoon passed in a blur of preparation and greeting arriving guests. Miller's wife had organized the women of the territory to create a feast that would be talked about for years. The barn had been transformed with lanterns and summer flowers, the usually practical space now holding both beauty and purpose. Thomas appeared as the sun began its descent, wearing a clean shirt and a proud smile. "Time to fetch the bride," he said gruffly, "unless you've changed your mind about letting this old cowhand give you away." Sarah took his arm, thinking how this man who had first viewed her with skepticism had become like a second father. Wouldn't have it any other way. They walked together toward the gathered crowd. Sarah saw faces that had once looked at her with doubt, now shining with acceptance and joy. Daniel stood tall among the hands, wearing James's old silver spurs, a gift marking his promotion to full rancher status. Jenny dabbed at her eyes with an apron corner while directing last-minute arrangements. Then Sarah saw James, waiting beneath an arch of woven prairie grass, and everything else faded away. He wore his father's watch chain and a look of quiet wonder that made her heart skip. As she reached him, he took her hands in his, their matching rings catching the golden light. The territorial judge, who had once upheld their boundary rights, now stood ready to bind their lives together. But first, James spoke words they had prepared. "When I offered you Blue Mesa," he said clearly, his voice carrying to all gathered, "I thought I was preserving my father's legacy. Instead, you showed me how to build something greater, a future, where tradition and progress dance together like wind through summer grass." Sarah's response came from her heart. "I came here seeking land to work and found a home to love. You trusted me with your father's dream, and I promise to honor that trust as we write the next chapters together." The judge smiled. A partnership, already proven in deed, now to be blessed in word. The rings, they exchanged the simple bands that meant so much, their hands sure and steady. As the judge pronounced them married, the setting sun painted Blue Mesa in shades of promise. The celebration that followed was everything their community represented. Abundant food shared with genuine warmth, music rising from talented hands, stories and laughter mixing with plans for the future. Bradford's consortium had sought to divide them. Instead, they had forged something unbreakable. Later, as lanterns glowed and dancers swirled in the barn, Sarah and James stood on their porch. Her head rested on his shoulder, their rings gleaming softly in the evening light. "Happy?" he asked, softly. Sarah looked out over their land, no longer his or hers, but truly theirs. The evening star shone bright above the mountains, and from the barn came the sound of joy unleashed. "More than happy," she answered. "Content. Like everything that came before was leading us here." James's arm tightened around her. "Not just us, all of them too," he gestured to their celebrating guests. "You've given them something to believe in, a way to face the future together." "We did that," she corrected gently, "and we're just getting started." Above them, the stars emerged one by one, witnesses to promises made and kept, to a love as deep as the land and as strong as the community they had built together at Blue Mesa. The new ranch sign caught the morning light, its fresh paint declaring Blue Mesa Ranch, James and Sarah Blackwood, in proud, steady letters. Sarah traced the ampersand with her fingers, feeling how it bound their names together, just as their shared vision united their lives. 1 month into their marriage, and already the rhythm of their partnership felt as natural as breathing. "Daniel's done a fine job with that sign," James said, riding up beside her. "Though I notice he put your name in slightly bigger letters than mine." Sarah laughed, hearing the warmth in his teasing. "He claims it was an accident, but Jenny says he's still grateful for those silver spurs you gave him." They rode together toward the North Valley, where their experimental breeding program was showing remarkable results. The morning air carried the promise of summer abundance, and all around them, Blue Mesa flourished under their combined care. Letter came from the Cattlemen's Association, James mentioned as they rode. "They want us to present our breeding tracking system at the territorial conference. Seems word has spread beyond our little valley." Sarah nodded, unsurprised. Their success had begun drawing attention from ranchers as far away as Montana. "I've been thinking about that. What if we offered more than just the tracking system? We could share our whole approach, water management, community cooperation, everything we've built here." James reined his horse closer, their legs touching as they rode. "Starting a revolution in ranching, Mrs. Blackwood. Building a legacy, Mr. Blackwood," she corrected gently. "Your father understood that real strength comes from lifting others up. We're just taking that wisdom further." They crested a rise overlooking the valley where their new strain of cattle grazed. The animals were everything they'd hoped for: hardy, well-muscled, and perfectly adapted to the Wyoming range. But it was more than just good breeding that made them special. These cattle represented the future Sarah and James were creating together. "Thomas mentioned Miller's boy is interested in learning our methods," James said. "Thought we might take him on, teach him like my father taught me, and like you taught Daniel," Sarah added. "We could do more of that. Train young ranchers in more than just cattle handling. Teach them about cooperation, about building communities instead of empires." A rider appeared on the horizon, Daniel himself, moving with the confidence of a full rancher now. He carried news about the water-sharing system they'd implemented after defeating Bradford's scheme. More neighboring ranches wanted to join, seeing how it had helped everyone through the dry spell. "It's working better than we hoped," Daniel reported proudly. "Even Bradford's son came by yesterday, asking if they could participate. Says his father's consortium is falling apart. Seems nobody wants to fight success." Sarah and James exchanged knowing looks. They'd heard Bradford was retiring, leaving his spread to his son, who, thankfully, had more of his mother's wisdom than his father's ambition. "Tell him he's welcome to join," Sarah decided. "The past is past. It's the future we're building now." They spent the morning reviewing operations, their complementary strengths making decisions flow naturally. James's years of experience balanced perfectly with Sarah's innovations, creating solutions neither could have developed alone. Near noon, they paused by the creek where James had first taught Daniel about water rights. A young family was picnicking nearby. New settlers who'd arrived last week, drawn by Blue Mesa's growing reputation as a place where hard work and cooperation were valued above all. "Remember that day at the station?" James asked softly. "When you stood there, refusing to give up on your dreams." Sarah touched her father's watch, now paired with her mother's locket around her neck. "Seems like another lifetime. I was so focused on proving myself, on finding my own piece of land to work. And instead you found a whole community to build." James took her hand, their rings catching the sunlight. "We both did." They rode back, as afternoon shadows lengthened, discussing plans for the territorial conference. The main house came into view, smoke rising warmly from Jenny's kitchen chimney. Thomas was teaching a group of young hands the proper way to mend tack, while Daniel led Miller's boy through the intricacies of the breeding records. "It's more than we dreamed, isn't it?" Sarah said, taking in the scene of purposeful activity. "This blend of old wisdom and new ideas, of personal success and community growth." James helped her down from her horse, holding her close for a moment. "It's exactly what we dreamed, just bigger, and it's only the beginning." The new sign gleamed in the afternoon light, their joined names promising a future where tradition and progress, love and ambition, personal dreams and community success could all flourish together on the endless Wyoming range. The family portrait hung in the study where it all began, capturing a moment 1 year after Sarah and James's wedding. They stood together on the porch of Blue Mesa's main house, their joined hands resting on the rail where so many important decisions had been made. Behind them, the ranch spread out like a testament to what love, trust, and shared vision could build. Sarah often paused to look at it, especially on mornings like this when the sunrise painted the mountains in the same golden hues the photographer had captured. Her father's watch ticked steadily in her pocket, while her mother's locket and James's silver spurs lay on the desk beside the ranch ledgers, symbols of the past that had guided them to this future. Thinking deep thoughts? James's voice came from the doorway, warm with understanding. He joined her by the portrait, his arms sliding naturally around her waist. "Thinking about circles," she replied, "how life brings us around to where we're meant to be." She touched her growing belly, their first child due when winter turned to spring. "Did you ever imagine, that day at the station, that we'd be here?" "I imagined possibilities," he said softly, "but you made them bigger than my dreams." The sound of hooves announced Thomas arriving for their morning meeting. The old foreman had grown prouder with each of Blue Mesa's successes, treating their innovations like a personal triumph. Today, he carried news about the latest group of young ranchers arriving to learn their methods. 10 more signed up for the training program, he reported with satisfaction. Word spread clear to California about what we're building here. What had started as informal lessons had grown into something remarkable. Ranchers from across the territories now sent their sons and daughters to Blue Mesa, learning not just about cattle and land management, but about the power of cooperation and community. "Daniel's doing well with the teaching," James noted. "Says, this group asks as many questions about water-sharing agreements as they do about breeding programs." Sarah smiled, remembering her own early days of learning Blue Mesa's ways. "They're figuring out what we discovered, that success isn't just about the land you own, but the connections you build." Jenny appeared with coffee and fresh-baked bread, her presence as essential to Blue Mesa's heart as any business success. "Letter came from Bradford's boy," she mentioned. "Says their new breeding program is showing fine results. Wants to thank you both for the guidance." The transformation of their former adversary into an ally was perhaps their proudest achievement. Bradford Sr. had retired to Denver, leaving his son free to embrace Blue Mesa's philosophy of cooperation over competition. The territory was stronger for it. Sarah moved to the window, watching the morning activity below. Daniel was demonstrating rope work to a group of students, his silver spurs catching the light as he moved. Among the learners was Miller's daughter, her eyes bright with the same dreams that had once brought Sarah west. "She reminds me of someone," James said, joining her at the window. "She reminds me of possibility," Sarah replied, "of what can happen when someone believes in your dreams." Their legacy was growing beyond anything they'd imagined. The breeding tracking system had become a territorial standard. Their water-sharing agreements were being studied by ranchers across the West. But more importantly, Blue Mesa had become a symbol of how tradition and progress could dance together, how personal success and community growth could strengthen each other. Thomas cleared his throat. "Time for the morning round, if you're up to it." His eyes held gentle concern for Sarah's condition. "Wouldn't miss it," she assured him, gathering her coat. Some things remained constant: the importance of knowing your land, of working beside your people, of holding to the rhythms that gave ranch life its meaning. James helped her mount, his hands lingering protectively. They rode out together as they did every morning, watching their world come alive. Students and hands tipped their hats as they passed, respect and warmth in their greetings. The cattle in the near pasture showed the distinct marks of their breeding program, strong and healthy against the Wyoming sky. At the top of the rise, they paused. Below them, Blue Mesa spread out like a living map of their shared dreams. The new buildings they'd added, the expanded corrals, the carefully managed pastures, each improvement bore the mark of their partnership. "Full circle," Sarah said softly, feeling their child move within her. "From a woman alone at a station to this." James took her hand, their rings catching the morning light. Not alone anymore, never alone again. They sat their horses together, watching the sun climb higher over their shared domain. The future stretched before them like the endless Wyoming prairie, full of promise and possibility. What had begun as one man's trust in a stranger's dreams had grown into something extraordinary, a legacy of love, wisdom, and community that would echo through generations. Sarah touched her father's watch one last time, then turned toward home. There was work to be done, lessons to teach, dreams to nurture, and they would do it as they had done everything since that fateful day at the station, together, making their own luck, writing their own story, building their own heaven. On the high plains of Blue Mesa Ranch,